The German shepherd broke formation, not by a single step. He sprinted. The moment the command echoed across the parade field, the highly trained federal working dog ignored every handler around him and ran straight toward a quiet trauma nurse standing near the back of the crowd. Gasps rippled through the audience. Military police instinctively reached for their radios. His handler shouted, "Atlas, heel!" The dog never looked back. Doctors froze. Veterans stood from their chairs. Families watching the ceremony held their breath. The nurse didn't move. She simply stood there in her sky-blue scrubs, clutching a patient chart with trembling hands. Several people whispered the same question. What's he doing? No one had an answer, because everyone knew one thing about Atlas. In 8 years of federal service, he had never broken formation. Until today. And what nobody watching knew was that Atlas wasn't running toward a stranger. He was running toward the one voice he had never forgotten. Before we continue, if you enjoy heartfelt stories about military heroes, extraordinary service dogs, and the quiet people whose kindness changes lives, make sure to subscribe. And tell us in the comments, has a dog ever surprised you with its loyalty? We'd love to hear your story. Walter Reed National Military Medical Center looked different that morning. American flags lined the main entrance. Rows of folding chairs filled the beautifully landscaped courtyard. Military bands rehearsed quietly beneath a clear blue sky. Veterans arrived wearing neatly pressed uniforms covered with ribbons earned over decades of service. Families filled the front rows. Children waved miniature American flags. Hospital staff moved carefully through the crowd, making sure every guest felt welcome. It was the annual Military Working Dog and Federal Service K-9 Appreciation Ceremony, one of Walter Reed's most meaningful traditions. Every year, retired military working dogs, active duty handlers, federal working K-9 teams, veterans, doctors, nurses, and recovering service members gathered to recognize the extraordinary partnership between people and dogs who serve the country. For many veterans, it was the most emotional day of the year. Inside the hospital. Olivia Bennett quietly adjusted the sleeve of her sky-blue scrub top before checking her patient schedule one last time. At 33, she had spent nearly 10 years working as a trauma nurse. Patients trusted her immediately. Doctors respected her judgment. Families often remembered her long after leaving the hospital, not because she spoke the loudest, but because she listened. There was one thing many people noticed before anything else. Olivia had a stutter. Not always, only when she became nervous or when she felt rushed. Some days, she spoke perfectly. Other days, simple introductions became difficult. She had learned to live with it. Most people were kind, some were not. Earlier that morning, Olivia carried a tray of medications toward the surgical wing. "And Nurse Bennett?" A young patient smiled from his bed. "Good morning," she smiled back. "Good morning, Jacob. Ready to go home?" The little boy nodded excitedly. "My dog misses me." Olivia laughed softly. I bet he does." Jacob grinned. "I think he'll tackle me." I hope not." Both laughed together. For Jacob. Her stutter didn't matter. He only heard kindness. Not everyone saw it that way. Near the nurses' station, 2 recently hired employees quietly reviewed paperwork. One looked toward Olivia. "Does she always talk like that?" The other shrugged. "I guess. It takes forever." Neither realized Olivia had heard them. She simply continued organizing patient files. She had heard comments like those before. Years ago, they hurt now. She reminded herself of something her father often said. The people worth listening to. Never judge someone by how long it takes them to speak. She quietly smiled, then continued working. Just before noon. Hospital Director Richard Coleman walked into the nurses' station. "Good afternoon, everyone," the staff greeted him warmly. He looked toward Olivia. "Nurse Bennett?" Yes, sir?" "We're a little short on volunteers outside. Would you mind helping during the appreciation ceremony?" She nodded immediately. "Oh, Of course. Thank you. You'll mainly assist veterans who need directions and help guests find seating. I'd be happy to. Director Coleman smiled. Excellent. The ceremony began precisely at 1 o'clock. Military musicians played softly as honored guests entered the courtyard. Rows of service dogs sat perfectly beside their handlers. German shepherds, Belgian Malinois, Labrador retrievers, each wearing immaculate service harnesses. Children watched in amazement. One little girl whispered, "They look like soldiers." Her grandfather smiled. "They are." Then, the announcer's voice echoed across the courtyard. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is our honor to welcome one of the nation's most distinguished federal working K-9 teams." The audience applauded. From the far end of the courtyard, a tall handler stepped forward. Beside him walked a magnificent black and tan German shepherd. Large, powerful, calm. Every movement was precise, every step perfectly synchronized with his handler. The announcer continued. Federal Service K-9 Atlas has participated in hundreds of protective operations alongside federal law enforcement and military agencies. He has received multiple commendations for exceptional discipline, and according to his handlers. The announcer smiled. He has never once broken formation during a public ceremony. Applause echoed throughout the courtyard. Atlas remained perfectly still. His intelligent amber-brown eyes focused straight ahead, unmoving, professional, calm, standing near the back of the audience. Olivia quietly handed bottled water to elderly veterans. She smiled warmly. "Gee, here you go." "Thank you." One elderly Marine smiled. "You've got a wonderful smile." Olivia laughed. "Thank you." She continued helping guests, never realizing. Atlas had already noticed her, several rows away. Atlas's ears twitched, almost imperceptibly. His handler felt the leash tighten ever so slightly. He glanced down. "Easy, boy." Atlas immediately returned to attention. The handler smiled. "Good." The ceremony continued. Awards were presented. Veterans received standing ovations. Military working dogs were honored one by one. The crowd applauded repeatedly. Everything unfolded exactly as planned, until a light breeze drifted across the courtyard. Atlas suddenly lifted his head. His ears stood upright. He inhaled deeply. Once, then again. His expression changed. The handler noticed immediately. "What is it?" Atlas slowly turned his head. Not toward the audience, not toward the band. Toward the back of the courtyard, toward Olivia. Commander Ethan Brooks, seated nearby, quietly frowned. Something's caught his attention. Another handler nodded. But what? Atlas remained perfectly still, watching, listening. Almost. Searching. Olivia continued helping an elderly veteran adjust his wheelchair. She never looked toward Atlas. She didn't even know he was there. She simply smiled kindly. There we go. Much better." The veteran patted her hand. "Thank you." "My pleasure." The master of ceremonies raised his microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will now conclude today's demonstration with the traditional honor formation." Every handler straightened. Every working dog immediately moved into position. The courtyard became completely silent. The lead instructor gave a clear command. "Formation." Every dog responded instantly, including Atlas. Then came the second command. "Forward." Every handler stepped together. Every dog moved in perfect synchronization, except one. Atlas suddenly stopped. His handler gently corrected the leash. "Forward." Instead, Atlas looked past the rows of veterans, past the honor guard, past the photographers. His breathing became quicker. The handler frowned. "Atlas, forward." The German shepherd didn't move. Military police quietly exchanged worried glances. The audience sensed something unusual. Another command came. "Heel." Nothing then. Without warning, Atlas broke formation. The leash slipped through his handler's fingers. The powerful German shepherd sprinted across the courtyard, straight toward Olivia Bennett. Someone shouted, "Stop him!" Several security officers instinctively rushed forward. Doctors gasped. Families stood. Veterans turned in disbelief. Near the nurse's station, Olivia looked up just in time to see the enormous German shepherd running directly toward her. Her heart skipped. Everyone watching expected her to scream or run. She did neither. She simply stood frozen. Atlas closed the distance within seconds. His handler shouted desperately, "Atlas!" The entire courtyard held its breath. No one had ever seen the disciplined Federal Service K-9 ignore a command. No one knew why he had chosen Olivia, and no one could imagine what he was about to do next. For a heartbeat, the entire courtyard forgot how to breathe. Atlas ran with incredible speed across the open lawn. His powerful paws struck the stone pathway in perfect rhythm. Doctors instinctively stepped backward. Families pulled their children closer. Military police hurried forward. His handler shouted again, "Atlas, down!" The German shepherd never slowed. Every eye followed him, straight toward Olivia Bennett. Olivia stood perfectly still. Her patient chart slowly slipped from her hands and landed softly on the ground. Her pulse raced. She had seen frightened dogs. She had comforted anxious patients. But she had never stood in front of a Federal Service K-9 charging directly toward her. Around her, people began shouting, "Move! Get back! Someone stop him!" An elderly veteran sitting nearby quietly whispered, "No, don't chase him." No one heard him. Commander Ethan Brooks rose from his chair. "Security!" Two officers started running toward Atlas. His handler raised one arm. "Wait!" The officers hesitated. No one knew Atlas better than his handler. And something about the dog's body language didn't look aggressive. He wasn't barking. He wasn't growling. His ears weren't pinned back. His eyes weren't fixed with aggression. Instead, he looked determined, as though he had just found someone he'd been searching for. Olivia's breathing became uneven. "No," she whispered softly, not because she was afraid, because something deep inside her felt strangely familiar. Atlas closed the final few feet. Then, to everyone's complete astonishment, he stopped, perfectly, less than an arm's length away. The courtyard became silent. Atlas looked up into Olivia's face, not moving, not blinking. The nurse slowly looked back into his warm amber-brown eyes. Something stirred inside her memory, a feeling, a voice, a place she hadn't thought about in years. She quietly swallowed. Her lips trembled. No, it can't be. Outside the formation, his handler slowly approached. "Easy, Atlas." The German shepherd never looked away from Olivia. It was as if the rest of the world had disappeared. Only the two of them remained. Olivia slowly lifted one trembling hand. She didn't reach toward him. She simply held it still, giving him the choice. Several handlers quietly exchanged surprised glances. "She's doing everything right." Another whispered, "Almost like she's worked with him before." Commander Brooks frowned. "That's exactly what I was thinking." Atlas took one slow step, then another. The enormous German shepherd lowered his head. He gently sniffed Olivia's fingertips. The nurse's eyes immediately filled with tears. A memory flashed through her mind. A younger German shepherd, a quiet rehabilitation center. Long afternoons spent sitting beneath maple trees, soft conversations, patient training sessions, a dog that listened without ever caring that she sometimes struggled to finish a sentence. She softly whispered, "A Atlas?" The German shepherd's ears lifted instantly. His tail moved. Once, then again. A quiet gasp spread through the crowd. His handler froze. He remembers his name from before. Dr. Rebecca Lawson looked confused. Before, the handler slowly nodded. When Atlas entered Federal Service, he wasn't called Atlas. The courtyard remained silent. Nobody understood. Olivia slowly knelt onto the stone pathway. Her sky-blue scrubs brushed against the warm afternoon sunlight. She smiled through tears. I knew it. Atlas quietly stepped forward, without hesitation. He gently rested his head against her shoulder. No excitement, no chaos, no tricks, just quiet trust, the kind that couldn't be trained in a single day. Several people quietly wiped away tears. Children smiled. Veterans exchanged knowing glances. Even the military band had stopped playing. Commander Brooks spoke quietly. I've seen Atlas ignore distractions. I've seen him ignore crowds. I've seen him ignore explosions during training. I've never seen him ignore a command. His handler slowly smiled. Neither have I. The senior ceremony coordinator looked completely bewildered. How? How is this possible? Nobody answered, because nobody knew. Not yet. For almost a full minute, Atlas never moved. He simply remained beside Olivia, the same nurse many people had barely noticed an hour earlier. The same nurse some had quietly judged because of the way she spoke. Now, one of the nation's most disciplined federal working dogs refused to leave her side. Near the front row, 2 hospital employees quietly looked at each other. One was the same nurse who had whispered earlier. It takes forever for her to talk. She lowered her eyes. I think we judged her. Her colleague nodded. We definitely did. Director Richard Coleman slowly walked toward Olivia. Nurse Bennett, she looked up. Yes, sir? He spoke gently. Do you know this dog? Olivia hesitated. Everyone waited. The cameras, the veterans, the handlers, the doctors, the entire audience. She looked into Atlas's eyes once more. Before she could answer. Atlas did something else that no one expected. He carefully nudged the left pocket of Olivia's scrub top with his nose. Once. Then again. Olivia looked down, confused. Then her eyes widened. She slowly reached into the pocket. There was only one thing inside, a faded blue fabric ribbon. She always carried it. It had been tucked away in her pocket for years without much thought. She unfolded it carefully. The ribbon was worn from age. Its edges had softened. Embroidered across the center were 2 simple words. Good boy. The moment Atlas saw it, his tail wagged harder. He gently touched the ribbon with his nose. Olivia covered her mouth. Tiny tears rolled down her cheeks. Commander Brooks stared at the ribbon. What is that? Olivia couldn't answer immediately. The memories were coming back too quickly. She softly laughed through her tears. I never thought. Atlas quietly leaned against her. As though reassuring her, the handler slowly looked at Director Coleman. I think we're about to hear an incredible story. Director Coleman nodded. So do I. The entire ceremony remained silent. Thousands of questions filled the courtyard. Why had Atlas recognized her? Why had he broken formation? What was the significance of the faded ribbon? And how could a nurse, who had never once mentioned working with service dogs, know one of the most disciplined federal canines in the country? Only Olivia knew the answer, and after nearly 10 years, she was finally ready to tell it. If this reunion has touched your heart so far, don't forget to like and subscribe. Stories like these remind us that true loyalty isn't measured by words. It's remembered through kindness that lasts a lifetime. The courtyard remained completely silent. Not even the military band moved. Atlas sat quietly beside Olivia Bennett, his head gently resting against her shoulder. The faded blue ribbon remained in Olivia's trembling hands for years. She had carried it inside the pocket of every pair of scrubs she owned, not because she expected anyone to notice, but because it reminded her why she became a nurse. Director Richard Coleman looked at her kindly. Nurse Bennett, when you're ready, please tell us. Olivia looked around the courtyard. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on her. Normally, That would have made her stutter even more. Today, she noticed something different. Nobody looked impatient. Nobody looked uncomfortable. They were simply listening. She took a slow breath. I met Atlas. Before he was Atlas. Several people exchanged confused glances. His federal handler slowly nodded. That's possible. He was given his operational name after completing advanced certification. Olivia smiled faintly. I knew him by another name. She looked down at the German shepherd. You were called Ranger. Atlas gently wagged his tail. The handler's eyes widened. I haven't heard anyone say that name in almost 8 years. Olivia continued softly. 10 years ago, I wasn't a nurse. I had just finished college. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I volunteered at a small rehabilitation center that worked with future military and federal service dogs. Most people in the audience leaned forward. The story was only beginning. It wasn't a training academy. It wasn't where they learned commands. It was where they came. Between chapters. Some dogs had finished basic training, some were recovering from stressful assignments, some simply needed quiet surroundings before returning to advanced programs. They stayed with us for a little while. We walked with them. We played with them. We reminded them that not every place in the world asked something from them. Commander Ethan Brooks quietly smiled. They were allowed to just be dogs. Olivia nodded. Exactly. She looked at Atlas again. Ranger arrived after refusing to trust almost anyone. He wasn't aggressive. He was overwhelmed. Every loud noise made him anxious. He hardly slept. He startled whenever doors slammed. The audience listened without interruption. I wasn't assigned to him, but every afternoon, I would sit beneath the same maple tree. I'd read my nursing textbooks out loud. A small smile crossed her face. I wasn't reading to teach him anything. I was practicing. My stutter was much worse back then. I was embarrassed. So I practiced where I thought nobody was listening. She laughed quietly. I was wrong. Atlas slowly looked up at her. Olivia gently scratched behind his ear. Every afternoon, he'd quietly come over. He'd lie beside me. I'd read. He'd listen. I never cared that he never understood the words. What mattered was that he never interrupted. A few people quietly smiled. He never looked impatient. He never looked embarrassed for me. He simply waited. Until I finished. Olivia looked toward the audience. You know something funny? My speech therapist once asked me. When do you notice your stutter the least? I told her. When I'm reading to a dog. Soft laughter spread through the courtyard. She continued. Over the next several months, Ranger slowly became confident again. He trusted people. He played. He wagged his tail. He was finally ready for advanced service training. Her smile faded slightly. The day he left, I tied this little ribbon to his favorite training toy. She held up the faded blue ribbon. It simply said, Good boy. I didn't think he'd ever see it again. Atlas gently nudged the ribbon once more. The handler quietly wiped away his eyes. I remember that toy. We kept it with him during transport. Olivia looked surprised. You did? The handler nodded. He searched for it the first few nights. We eventually stored it with his transition belongings. He looked at Atlas. I never knew where the ribbon came from. Director Coleman quietly asked. So today. When Atlas caught your scent, Olivia nodded. I think he remembered. Not because I'm special, but because, for a little while, I was part of a place where he finally felt safe. Commander Brooks smiled warmly. I've worked with military dogs for 25 years. They forget commands. They forget buildings. They even forget routes. But they almost never forget trust. The entire audience applauded, not loudly, gently, respectfully. Veterans stood first, then nurses, then doctors. Soon, the entire courtyard rose to its feet. Olivia looked overwhelmed. She shook her head. You don't have to. Director Coleman smiled. We do. This isn't only for today. It's for every quiet act of kindness no one ever saw. The nurse who had mocked Olivia earlier slowly approached. She looked embarrassed. "Olivia." Olivia turned. "I'm sorry. I judged you because of your stutter, I thought." She looked down. "I confused hesitation with weakness." Olivia smiled gently. "You weren't the first, and you probably won't be the last." The nurse's eyes filled with tears. "How do you stay so kind?" Olivia looked at Atlas. "Because the ones who listened to me never made me feel like I had to speak perfectly to deserve kindness." Later that afternoon, the ceremony resumed, but Director Coleman made one unexpected announcement. "Before we conclude, I'd like to recognize someone whose name was never on today's program." He looked toward Olivia. "Military working dogs and Federal Service canines are remembered for their courage. So are their handlers. But sometimes, the people who quietly prepare them, are forgotten." He smiled. "Today, we remember them too." The audience applauded once more. Several months later, Walter Reed established a new volunteer partnership with organizations that rehabilitated future military and federal working dogs. Young nursing students began reading to anxious service dogs during recovery periods, not because it was therapy for the students, not because it was formal training for the dogs, simply because calm voices, patient company, and quiet afternoons sometimes changed lives. One autumn morning, Atlas returned to Walter Reed for another appreciation event. This time, the handlers smiled before the ceremony even began. Commander Brooks laughed. "Should we just let him?" His handler grinned. "We already know where he's going." The command was given. The formation started. Atlas walked perfectly beside his handler until the ceremony officially ended. Then, without a single command, he calmly walked across the courtyard, past rows of applauding veterans, past doctors and photographers, straight toward the nurse's station. Olivia looked up from her patient chart. She smiled. "Hi, Ranger." Atlas's tail immediately wagged. He gently rested his head against her shoulder once again. No cameras, no speeches, no applause, just an old friend saying hello. Nearby, a little boy watched with wide eyes. He looked up at his grandfather. "Grandpa, how did the dog know her?" The old veteran smiled. "Because dogs don't listen the way people do." The boy frowned. "What do you mean?" The veteran gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "People often remember how someone speaks." He looked at Olivia and Atlas. "But a good dog remembers how someone made them feel." The boy smiled. "I want to be remembered like that." The veteran nodded. "So do I." As the afternoon sun settled over, Walter Reed, doctors, nurses, veterans, patients, and families watched Atlas quietly walking beside Olivia through the hospital courtyard. Years earlier, people had overlooked a young woman because she sometimes struggled to finish a sentence. But one remarkable service dog never noticed her stutter. He noticed her patience, her kindness, her steady presence. And after all those years, that was the only introduction he ever needed to remember. Before you go, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had a pet or met a dog who remembered you after years apart? Or have you ever experienced a moment when someone looked beyond your imperfections and simply accepted you for who you are? Share your story in the comments below. We genuinely read your comments, and many of your experiences inspire the stories we tell. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe.